most important of all, as you'll notice, the program was called subtitled Buyers Aren't Liars. So most important of all, you'll probably notice that you'll be able to zero in exactly on what the buyer's wanting in such a way that they know that you understand them. And that seems to be one of the biggest problems that I see out there in real estate, or that agents come across, is you're working with somebody and they're going, yeah, this is close but not quite, and then they end up working with somebody else, or they go out on the weekends and they buy a for sale by owner, and they call you and say, hey, thanks, I really enjoyed working with you and I found the perfect house myself. Why do they end up going out on the weekends looking for themselves? Or why do they end up searching the internet without you?
You're not finding what they want.
Exactly, because you're not finding what they want. And I don't care who I've talked to. Every single one of my friends, every single one of my associates, all tell the same exact story. I was talking to a business associate of mine right here in town, and she just bought a house literally a year ago, and she is a therapist, so she bills by the hour, and the more people she sees in a day, the more money she makes, and her schedule's fully booked. So when she went to buy this house, one of the things that was happening is she needed to go out and look at houses. So she would take off 2-3 hours out of her schedule, and then she'd come back, and I'd talk to her on the phone the next day, and she would just complain, because she'd go, oh, I just wasted 3 hours that I could have made money with, because I went out looking with this agent, and none of it was anything like what I wanted to buy. And she must have gone through at least 5 agents.
Oh, wow.
And finally, she ended up buying the house on her own. She went out and found it on her own and said, okay, this is the house I want to buy. And then literally contacted, I think, a friend or somebody that was an agent and said, okay, here's the house I want to buy, let's buy it. But 5 different agents couldn't find out what she was looking for. Susan will tell you the exact same story of a house that she went to buy in Florida. And every time she goes to buy it, what happens, Susan?
Oh, they never let. They stuck me in a car for a day. It was horrible. Drove me to every house I did not want to look at. And I actually, when we were driving the street, I want a house that looked like that. Or not once did they take me to a house that looked like that. They had their own, apparently their own idea of what I needed. And they even wanted me to sign one of these forms that says I wouldn't go to any other realtor. And the next day, I just fired them. It was just horrible. And we went through quite a few realtors down there before we actually found a house. And we actually wound up buying a house I didn't even like, just to get through the process because I was so sick of it.
Oh, wow.
So it was, it was a bad experience. I would never do it again. I'd never go, well, I would now that I know realtors, but if I didn't know a realtor, I would never go through that experience again. I'd do it all on my own.
See, so there's a classic example of somebody spending time in the car, feeling like the agent's not listening to them at all, saying that they fired the agent, saying that they'd never want to go through the process again, that they ended up just buying a house just to buy it, didn't even like it, and having just a bad experience. And that's a lot of people's experience out there. Otherwise, there wouldn't be this common saying, buyers are liars. We talked when I was talking to you before, and when Carol Yates came in, she gave that example of somebody who had taken the class before, and somebody came to them and said, here, I want to buy a house on small acreage, out in the country. And the person, because the agent knew how to do this process, they ended up turning around and selling the person a condo. And the person goes, oh, I just love it. It's perfect. I was totally, completely happy with the process. Because what people say and what they want are often 2 completely different things. And what you're going to learn through this process is exactly how to go from what they say to to finding out exactly what they really want. So the real question right now is, before we actually teach you that process, how do you actually sell right now? And when I ask that, what I mean by is I'm getting to a slightly another point here, which is you are a salesperson. Your job is to sell somebody something. If you don't, how much money do you make? None, right? And now as a part of that sales process, what you really want to do is be able to motivate people. Be able to tap into those emotional buttons and push them. That's part of selling. So the question is, since you don't know this yet, how do you sell right now? Well, one of the ways that you mentioned you were selling was, again, you'd taken somebody else's program and they had scripts. So that's one way of selling, right?
Right.
Use a particular script. Now, sometimes scripts can be effective. They can be effective because, again, we can look at what other people have done successfully, how do they word things successfully, and we can say, ooh, you know, if we word it this way, historically and on average, people are going to respond.
It doesn't work for every person. Everybody responds differently.
Exactly, you've noticed that.
You have to kind of wing it when you get a different weird response.
Right.
And read the person.
That's the big thing, is not everybody's going to respond to it. The second big thing that I have a problem with scripts is when you're using a script, even if you're fantastically good at it, there's a problem. The other person is going to know. The other person is going to feel that. And the problem with a script that way is mentally you're relying on the script. So mentally, if the script's not working, now what do? You're kind of like, what's plan B?
You have to really mirror and match people
Yep,
and make them comfortable.
you do. And we're going to
Build rapport.
that is the first step in a buying process. In any buying process, the very first step is rapport, is to get that rapport. But if you've ever had a telephone call at home from anybody trying to sell something, can you tell when they're using a script?
Yes.
How does that feel to you when you know they're using a script?
I just want to hang up on them. I hate them.
You hate them, you just want to hang up on them. So, how do you think it goes across when you're using one?
Better than them.
Better than them. At least you hope it goes better than them, don't you? You're hoping. Geez, I hope this doesn't sound...
I call people that I know have a need, so, you know, when people are just randomly calling me about citing and stuff.
Well, yeah, if you're calling expireds, you know they have a need, but again, I'm not saying we are going to give you some specific language and stuff, but I want you to understand that you need to become better at what you just talked about. You need to become better at getting rapport with the person and leaving the script behind. Even when we go through and I teach you this stuff, one of the things that I try to pound into people over and over again over the hours that we're going to be together is I'm going to teach it to you, and I'm going to teach it to you in a specific way. And that's a specific set approach. And for some reason I have to pound this in over and over again is that's just how we're teaching it. Now, take it and use it the way it fits for you. Okay? Some of the wording is very specific. And I'm going to point that out when I point it out. And oftentimes when I say a word specific, it's going to be a word. For example, you're going to need to use the word how instead of why. Or you're going to need to use the word why instead of how. And I'm going to tell you why that word's important because the word itself causes something to happen to the other person unconsciously. But as we do it here in class, again, we're taking this sales process and I'm condensing 15 minutes down into 2. And I want you to understand that we're doing that so that when you go back out into the real world, you take what we teach you and put it into your personality. You put it into the way you normally are going to do things, the way you're comfortable doing things. This particular process can fit with anything else you learn. It's going to fit with other classes you might take. It's not going to invalidate anything else. What it's going to do is actually make other things work better. So for example, if you've already got some scripts that you like using, that's great. What you're going to find is that after you go through this process, you're going to be able to take those and make them more effective for you.
And in person, I want more results in person.
Exactly.
I can get the appointments, but once I get out there, I don't always win.
By the time we get done here, I'll be really shocked if you're not winning the vast majority of the time, 90% of the time or more. You're not going to probably win 100% of the time because 10% of the people aren't actually selling their house. They're not actually really even in the market to list.
Automated.
Well, they're just calling you out because they wanted to see how much money is our house worth, so I can go get a second on it and invest the money.
Right.
Neighbor down the street's getting this much for their house, or they're asking this much for their house. So what's mine worth?
Exactly. They're not actually interested in listing their house. They're just interested in having you come over and give them comps. Okay. I don't care what I teach you, you're not going to be able to sign those people because they're not actually in the market for it. One of the things that happens when you're trying to sell right now is when you're trying to convince somebody or you're trying to motivate somebody. A lot of things what we do is we try to prove to them. Okay? So as a stockbroker, one thing I would do is use logic. Here's all these facts and figures. But again, that never worked. Or I would try to prove to them. This is a really good value. Here's why it's a really good value. Here's all the comparisons and stuff like that. And when you try to prove stuff to people or when you try to use logic, how often does that work? Almost never. Because again, we don't use logic to make decisions. We use emotion and then we justify it with the logic. Best of all, what I think real estate agents use to sell is what I like to call that hot-cold game. It's the same game we played when we were kids, where you go outside the room and everybody in the room hides something, and then you walk into the room and you try and find it. And as you're walking, they start to go, ooh, you're getting warmer, warmer, warmer. And you start to walk the other way and they go, ooh, cold, colder, ooh, freezing, freezing. Now, as a kid, when you played that game, you could always find where the thing was hidden, couldn't you? Because the person's telling you. They're giving you clues. And this is exactly what I see happen with real estate agents when they're working with buyers, for example. You take them out to a house, and if you're a good real estate agent, especially the agents that have been in the field a long time, they go, oh, I can play this game really, really well. I can get it in. It's almost like that game, I can get that in 3 notes or 4 notes or whatever. Remember that old show? So, bad agents, like the one Susan worked with, never get it. So, they can't get that song in 20 notes. Now, really good agents that have been in the field for a few years go, ooh, I'm great at this game. I can get that house in 3 houses. I can take them out and I can show them 3 different houses. And by the time I get done, now I know what they're looking for. Well, how do they do that? Because they take them to a house, and the person walks in and goes, "No, cold." And then they walk them in the kitchen, and the person goes, "Ooh, warmer." They take them in the backyard, and the person goes, "Nah, colder." They take them to the next house. The person goes, "Ooh, yeah, this backyard's warmer. No, this kitchen's colder. Yeah, this front room's warmer." And by the time they've done that 3 or 4 or 5 times, really good agents start to go, "Ah, now I know what they're looking for." You ever noticed how that happens? What if you didn't have to play the game? What if you knew right off the bat, before you even went out, what they were looking for? How much time would that save you? Now, what's the one thing as a real estate agent that's limited for you?
Time.
Exactly. How many more people could you work with if you took the time you spent with somebody and cut it in half? Well, you could work with twice as many people, couldn't you? What if you took the time you were working with somebody and cut it down to a fourth? How much more productive could you be?
4 times.
What if you could take that down and cut it down to a tenth? How much more productive could you be?
10 times.
Exactly. Now, I don't know how much more productive you're going to be right off the bat, but what I can tell you is if you master this process, you're really not going to have to play that game. You're not going to have to go out there and go hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. You're going to be able to take them someplace and they're going to go, "Ooh, this is it." Sure, you're probably still going to end up showing them 2 or 3 houses, but instead of showing them 2 or 3 just to get an idea of what they want, you're going to take them out, show them 2 or 3, and they're going to end up buying one of them. You're literally not going to have to play that game anymore.
Do you suggest that people sit down with their buyers and do a buyer consultation?
Yeah, we're going to actually show you how you can sit down with a person, and by asking them certain kinds of questions in that buyer's consultation, like that, you're going to know exactly what they're looking for, exactly what they want, before you even step out the door with them. The fun thing about doing that buyer's consultation like that is now, when you go to send them emails, or when you go to send them, faxes of houses that you think might be interesting to them, guess what's going to happen? They're going to go, "Ooh, yeah, that's what I'm looking for." Versus, like I say, my partner who would get faxes from the agents and go, "Why is he sending me this?" Or she'd get faxes and go, "Why is the agent sending me these? These are nothing like what I'm looking for." And because she was getting those, "Ooh, this is nothing what I'm looking for," guess what she was doing? Going out and looking on her own. Or getting on the internet and searching on her own. But if you're sending them stuff that when they get it, they're going to go, "Yep, that's exactly what I'm looking for," are they going to feel the need to actually go out there and search on their own? And when that happens, guess what happens to your referrals?
They go in.
And ultimately, down the road, that's how you want your business to be,
Right.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing we're going to talk about, if you flip the page, is that the techniques we're going to teach you are the same techniques, flip it again, the same techniques that natural-born salespeople use. These are the techniques that, I don't care who the person is, if the person, whether they're natural-born or whether they're actually taught to be a really good salesperson, but if we went out there and we took the top 1% or the top 3% of people that are agents out there right now, we could sit down and we can watch them, and I can videotape it, and then I can go back, and as we do that, a lot of the techniques that I'm going to show you, you're going to be able to go, "Ooh, they're doing that. They're using that technique." Now, a lot of times, natural salespeople don't know they're doing that. And that's one of the problems, too. If somebody's a natural salesperson, or if they're really, really good at it, can they necessarily show you how to do it? Not necessarily, because they don't sometimes even know how they're doing it. And you'll especially notice that in a lot of fields, whether it's in sales, whether it's in sports or anything else. Does the best, pitcher of all time necessarily make the best baseball coach? No, not necessarily, because sometimes they're not good coaches. The person that's the coach is the person that can actually analyze, ooh, here's the movement, here's what the person's actually doing, and can communicate that to somebody else. And what you're going to find is that a lot of times, when we talk about this sometimes when we talk about the success class, is people that are really successful, you might ask them, how did they do that? And they're going to tell you one thing, and that's not it. They're honest. They're telling the truth. That's what they think made them successful. They're not lying, but it isn't. You got to look and see, what are they really doing? What's actually happening? That they have in common with everybody else that's successful. And if we can find those common characteristics, those common traits, then we can teach that to somebody else. And they can do it. Natural born salespeople do these techniques. And you're going to watch and see. One of the things you mentioned at first when you're contacting somebody or when you're working with them is that ability to get rapport. Right? Natural born salespeople are fantastic at getting rapport. Phenomenal at it. And there's some really fascinating, cool techniques to get rapport. One of the ones that you talked about was matching and mirroring. Okay? And you've probably never heard of that before. Have you? Okay? Matching and mirroring is really simple. Okay? It's, for example, one of the things you can do when you talk to somebody on the phone is you can match their tonality. You can match the rhythm, the rate, the tempo that they're speaking. Let me give you an example of that. I teach the same kind of techniques to insurance agents. And one of the times we were working with an insurance company, and with this particular insurance company, I was actually working with not the agents themselves, but the people answering the phones. And one of the things that was happening is the people answering the phones, whether it was the secretaries or whether it was the people at the call centers that were handling the claims, were having a problem with people as far as getting rapport. Here's why. When people are calling an insurance company like that because they're having a problem, they call on the phone and they're all upset. And they're talking like, ooh, I've really got this problem and you don't understand and nobody's been able to help me. Right? That's how they sound. So what happens when they're all upset, or you call somebody and you're all upset? Imagine, you're all upset. You've gotten the wrong bill 3 months in a row and you've talked to 3 different people. And you call and they say, oh, that's okay.
Then you get more upset.
Exactly. You get more upset, don't you? Why do you get more upset?
Because it's not okay.
Exactly. And you understand when they're saying it's okay and they're talking to you in this really nice voice, you understand, or you feel anyway, they don't get it.
Or they're just shining you on.
Yeah.
They can't wait to get you off the phone.
Exactly.
You don't think you're going to get anywhere with them because they've already given you that feeling that
Yeah, you just have a feeling.
another phone call.
Exactly. But what happens when you get on the phone with them and they say hello in their nice voice, and then you start ranting and they start going, oh my gosh, that's horrible. I wouldn't put up for that either. And you start answering them, and if that person started giving you the same tonality, the same tone of voice back, what would you then think? Ooh, they get it.
Get it, yeah. I use that one a lot with clients that are upset about things. It works perfect.
It works perfect, doesn't it? That's matching somebody. Give you a perfect example of this. When I first learned that technique, matching and mirroring, and just tonality, I actually learned it when I was at a convention. This was years and years ago. And I was at this convention, and then I decided, Convention had gone through the week, and then there was post-convention classes that were on Saturday and Sunday. And after attending some of the classes, there was a couple of the presenters I thought, I really want to attend their post-convention classes because I wanted to learn even more. So I thought, I want to stay, over on Saturday and Sunday. But my reservations only went through Friday. So I went up to the front desk to see if I could extend my reservation. And just as I'm going up to the front desk, there was somebody already there at the front desk talking to the person at the hotel. And so I stood there and waited, and as I was waiting, I could listen to this person. And they were trying to do the exact same thing I wanted to do. They were trying to stay over Friday night and Saturday night. And they were talking to the hotel person. The hotel person was busy explaining to them how they couldn't do that because they were fully booked. Other conventions were coming in, and there was just no way. The hotel was already completely booked. This person tried using reasoning, persuasion, I was standing there a good 10 minutes as the person pleaded, begged, did everything but get down on their knees to try and convince this hotel person to extend their reservation. Nope, couldn't do it. They finally said, try this hotel, this hotel, but we can't do it. So I'm standing there, and finally that person gives up and walks away. And now, what am I thinking? Gee, what's the chances I'm going to be able to extend my reservation? This person I just listened to for 10 minutes do everything, and they couldn't. But I thought, well, I've just taken this class. What the heck? And while I was listening, I listened to that person on the other side of the counter's tonality and their tempo and their voice inflection and stuff like that. So when I got up to the counter, they said, may I help you? Or whatever they said, and I matched that back to them. And obviously did it perfectly, because the person on the other side of the counter, their face flushed. And they went and paused, and as I kind of explained what I wanted to do, and they went, just a minute, and they left. I was thinking, whoa, what happened? They didn't tell me they didn't have any things, they didn't argue with me. They come back 5 minutes later and said, Mr. Ellsworth, I made arrangements, you can stay over in your room. I'm like, whoa, this stuff works. 2 days later, as I'm checking out of the hotel, same person was up to the front desk. I walk up with a couple of the people that were at the same conference, that I made friends with, and we're all checking out together. And this reception person at the front desk goes, oh, Mr. Ellsworth. Started calling me by name and turns to the other people and go, oh, do you guys know Mr. Ellsworth? He's such a nice guy. And I'm like, whoa, this person's like my long-lost friend. And I've only talked to him once. That's the power of rapport when you can match and mirror like this. Okay? This particular class, we're just going to touch on that because that's not really the purpose of this class. I'm going to teach you an even more powerful technique for rapport. Matching and mirroring is a good technique. It's a phenomenal technique for getting rapport. We're going to teach you even more subtle variations of that. In one of the advanced classes, I actually teach an even more advanced technique that we call an unconscious handshake, which is in the first 1 second that you meet somebody, they do something specifically. And if you can match and mirror that, if you can feed that back to them, in that second, you're going to have instant rapport. The person's going to literally go, ooh, you're like my long-lost cousin. So we actually get even more into rapport when we get into some of the advanced stuff. We'll teach you even more about how to do that. In this class, we're going to teach you some of that. But that is one of the things that natural salespeople do, is number one, they establish rapport with people. And there's different ways they go about that. One of the ways they go about that is matching and mirroring. as I talked about before, one of the things that you can match or mirror are those verbal predicates that people use. I talked about in the free introduction how when you're taking somebody out to see a house, or when they're talking to you, they're going to use a certain kind of language. They're going to say things like, here's what I'm looking for. And then when they walk into the house, they're going to go, ooh, this room looks really nice. I can see myself, in this kitchen, and that kind of thing. And so if they're using visual words like that, what happens when you turn around and you go, yeah, this would be a really good fit? You lose rapport. They totally go, eh. So one of the techniques that we're actually going to teach you in this class is how to match those verbal predicates, because that's a more subtle form of rapport. It's a step up from matching their physical characteristics. Physical characteristics, sometimes people will notice that you're matching and mirroring. Matching their verbal predicates, no one ever notices you're matching. I've been doing this years, and I've never had anybody come back to me and say, ooh, I know what you're doing. You're matching my verbal predicates. Right? Never had that happen. I've taught classes before where I've taught people in the class that are very good and have already learned a lot of these rapport techniques, and you go to match and mirror them and they go, hey, wait a minute, I know what you're doing. You're, speaking the same rate I'm speaking. So people will catch that consciously. But in all the years I've taught advanced classes, I've never had anybody go, ooh, you're matching my verbal predicates. Just doesn't happen. And some of the other stuff that we do too, people never pick up on. In 20 years, I've never had anybody notice that I was doing it, even in the most advanced classes. So, to start with, we're actually going to get now down into the meat of this whole process. And the very most basic thing to the meat of this process is the concept of conscious versus unconscious or subconscious. Where we're going to be working, and where I want you to focus your attention, is over here. Subconscious or unconscious. In the past, I can almost guarantee, with every other training you've ever done, they're going to focus over here. Unconscious. But guess what? That's not where the action is. The action's not happening over here consciously. We think it is, but it's not. Let me explain what I mean by conscious and unconscious. Conscious is everything you're thinking about right now. So if I asked you what your phone number was, you can remember that. But were you thinking about it 2 minutes ago? No. So 2 minutes ago, where was that phone number?
Subconscious.
Exactly. It was over here in subconscious or unconscious. Over here in conscious, according to theory, you're going to be aware of 5 to 9 bits of information. At any moment in time, that's what you can be aware of. So we call 7 plus or minus 2. So for example, as I'm standing up here talking, your conscious mind is going to be occupied by these 7 bits of information. You're going to notice, ooh, what's he doing with his hands? So your eyes are going to be going, ooh, that's a bit of information. You're going to notice what I'm saying. And you're going to take those words and you're going to be interpreting those. That's another bit of information. Now, over here consciously, have you been paying attention to the sound of the air conditioner? But now that I pointed that out, can you hear it? Mm-hmm. Now before, did you hear it at all?
No.
You did over here. You were hearing it, but it was unconscious.
Okay.
And your unconscious mind said, ooh. Your unconscious mind is aware of millions, if not billions, of bits of information. But what happens is, as it goes from unconscious, there's a filtering mechanism where the unconscious mind decides what should we pay attention to. And it filters those millions of bits of information into the 7 bits that you consciously pay attention to. So the air conditioner, your unconscious mind was paying attention to, but it said, wait a minute, that's not important, don't listen to it. So consciously you never heard it. Let me give you a perfect example of that filtering mechanism that you're all probably experienced. Have you ever bought a car? If you've ever bought a car, all of a sudden you take this car that you just bought and you're driving down the road. And as you're driving down the road that day, especially that first hour or two, or especially that first day, you're driving down the road and you start to go, ooh, there's a car just like mine. Ooh, there's another one. Ooh, there's another one. Okay? So all of a sudden, that day, what happens to your conscious awareness? How many cars just like yours are you actually being aware of? Dozens of them, aren't you? Now, a month before, when you were driving down the road, did you even see those cars?
I was thinking of buying one.
You might have if you were thinking about it.
Started noticing them more.
Right. See? So as you start to think about buying it, what happens to this filter? The filter says, ooh,
Right.
let that through. But until you actually shift that filter, they don't get through. So for example, how many Volkswagens did you see yesterday? Exactly. You know, how many pickup trucks drove past you yesterday? I'm sure they did, but did you actually notice them? Probably not.
We just got a new truck, so.
Oh, so you noticed them. See? Perfect example of that. That's what I mean. What we're going to be working with is this filtering mechanism. How do you start to play with that? Now in the success class that I teach, I actually teach you how to really play with that so that you can take the stuff that you want to achieve and it becomes like red pickups. And you just bought one. And now you start to go, woo, that's obvious. And it starts to just jump out at you. Because you can play with this filtering mechanism. What we want to do is go past this filtering mechanism, and then we're going to teach you how to find this information over here that even the buyer and seller don't recognize because it's unconscious. They're not aware of it. It's beyond that filter to them. You can ask them conscious questions, but they may not even know the answer to something that's over here. Okay? If you turned your manual, in your manual, there's a picture of an iceberg. I think it's around page, there you go. Now, we've talked about this conscious, unconscious. The conscious is that tip of the iceberg. It's that 10% that you can actually see. And from what we're talking about here, it's the logic, it's the reasoning, it's that kind of stuff. But beneath the surface over here unconsciously with an iceberg is 90% of the bulk of the iceberg. Same thing is true with your buyer or seller. Beneath the surface is that 90%, and that's all their emotions, their buying strategy, their values, their buying filters, their whole life experience that's stored away in memory is over here. All their likes and dislikes and why they like them and dislike them are over here, unconsciously. We all have those likes and dislikes. So if I asked you, why do you like a particular color? Consciously, would you know why? Maybe not. Over here, unconsciously, you would. If I said, why do you like a particular kind of kitchen or a particular kind of backyard? Consciously, you may not know why, but unconsciously you do. Because this particular backyard reminds you of when you were 5. And that's what you want your kids to have. That's over here. It's unconscious. And that's what we want to tap into. We want to tap into that 90% of the iceberg that's really what's going on. Again, I use that analogy. If I want to move the iceberg, and if I'm in sales, that's what I'm doing. I'm wanting to move the iceberg. I want it to go the direction I want to go. So in order to sell the person, I've got to move them north. Can I move them north by blowing on the top of the iceberg? Isn't going to happen. I can blow all day long. I can pull up hurricane force winds. Is it going to move the iceberg? Nope. Not if the current underneath that's hitting the 90% of it is going south. I can bring up hurricane force winds and hit the top of it. Am I going to move it north? Not at all. Because that's not what's really going on. And it's the same thing with your buyers and your sellers. What's really moving them is going to be beneath the surface. And you've got to be able to tap into that if you want to move them one way or the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, how are we going to be able to find, and how are we going to be able to tap into what's going on beneath the surface? Well, the first way that we're going to do that is to understand how this works over here. We think using our senses. We think using sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. That's literally how your brain is processing information, both consciously and unconsciously. The way I like to describe that is, imagine if a baby was born, and if this baby couldn't see. What if it couldn't hear? What if it couldn't feel? What if it couldn't smell? What if it couldn't hear or taste? How would it actually experience anything if it didn't have any senses? Couldn't. And if it couldn't perceive or experience anything, how would it actually know anything? And if it couldn't know, how would it literally even be able to think? We think using those senses. What goes on in your mind, if you pay attention to it, is a combination of those senses. You're going to have pictures flash through your mind. You're going to have words. You know, everybody talks to themselves, right? On a daily basis, you have so many of those thoughts flash through your mind, you can't keep track of them all. Unless you're an experienced meditator, you can't go more than 5 seconds without a thought popping through your mind. I often like to do that experiment, you know? Watch. I don't want you to think of anything at all. Ready? Go. Okay? Were you able to keep your mind totally and completely blank?
No.
See? So there's stuff going on all the time. And what's going on is pictures, words. So for example, today you're going to have probably between 50 and 60,000 of those thoughts. Now tomorrow if I ask you, ooh, 50,000, certainly you could remember 1 out of 100. Would you be able to remember like 500 thoughts that you had yesterday?
No.
Exactly. Well, hey, you could probably remember 1 out of 1,000, right? What are 50 thoughts you had yesterday? That's extremely tough too, isn't it? Mm-hmm. See, this stuff just goes whoom, through our mind and we don't even notice that it's doing that. And the way it's doing that is with our senses. Sight, sound, taste, touch. Predominantly, we really use three senses to think: sight, sound, and feeling. Most of our thoughts are made up of those. Now, we use those senses to think with. And what happens with those senses is that we put them together in a specific order. That specific order is going to become part of what we call the code. And you'll notice the title of this class is Cracking the Buying Code. Now, why do we call it cracking the buying code? Because the way a person buys, or how they unconsciously come to that decision consciously to buy, is a code. It's no different than the combination to a safe. And if you've got that combination, if I know that the combination to the safe is left 23, right 17, left 4, can I open the safe? Absolutely. And I can do it time after time after time, can't I? Mm-hmm. Every single person you deal with has a code. And every single one of them is different. And if you know what that is, you can open the safe. It's super simple, super easy, if you just know the code. The code has to do with those senses and the order that they're put in. But to make it even more simplistic for you, to make it even easier, we take those senses, and as we try to communicate them to somebody else, we use words. Right? Because as I'm trying to talk to you, I can't use pictures because you gotta understand what the pictures are in my mind. So I'm going to use words to represent those pictures. I'm going to use words to represent what's going on over here subconsciously. So I'm going to take whatever's going on here subconsciously, and I'm going to use a word consciously to tell that to you. And I like to call those code words. So when somebody walks into your office and they said, "Ooh, I want a house that's really open." The word open is a code word. What picture did they just pull up from unconscious that they're thinking about when they said the word open? Okay? Now, when I said open, right now, when I said I want a house that's really open, you all did something.
We put in our mind what we would think is open.
Exactly. In your mind, you put in there what open means to you.
Right.
And you interpreted what I said. You have to. Because these code words are what we call nominalizations. They don't mean anything. And the way we like to define that is you can't put them on the table there. Can I put open on the table so that you can see it? No, it doesn't exist, does it? So in order for you to interpret this thing that I can't put on the table, you have to go into your own memory, unconsciously for you, and interpret that. Now, when I said open, what did that mean to you?
A great room feel, like the family room, kitchen is all open.
Okay. What did it mean to you?
That the floor plan was laid out with minimal walls between each room.
Okay. And remember, when we were talking about this before with Cheryl, what did it mean to Cheryl? With Cheryl, she was saying, well, it meant wide hallways because I'm a big person, and it meant, tall ceilings.
Yeah.
It physically meant, I can move around and I'm not going to bump into things. See, so her interpretation of it was, again, completely different. Here's the problem that happens. And here's what you're doing right now and what your tendency is going to do into the future. And I've been doing this for years, and occasionally in class, you'll even catch me do it. Not often, But it happens.
I got it. I busted it.
She did. Once in the last year, she caught me in class doing this. Which is, the person says this code word, like open, and I interpret it. And I use my interpretation. Now guess what happens? We call that contamination. They say open, and I go, ah, I know exactly what that means. And now I go out and I start to show them houses that are what open means to me. And guess what happens? Exactly, it's not what they're looking for. And you go, but these are all open. Because you're contaminating. You took the code word and interpreted it. And that's the biggest kind of thing that you're going to have a problem with, is making sure that when you're talking to somebody, when you're listening to them, that you don't take that code word and contaminate.
So what do you say to them?
Just one second, she's going to